Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? It's almost Thursday. I'm late. I tried to do this twice before, but the Wi-Fi in my hotel is not great. So Anjanette saved the day with her little portable Wi-Fi. Angie, one of my listeners, gave me one, but that one didn't work. So I'm hoping Anjanette's does. All right, day 27 in the books. Closings for the state over. We're going to talk about what to expect tomorrow. First, our music fact of the day, Kodachrome by Paul Simon. Okay, I heard this coming back to the hotel after court today, and I was like jamming, and I thought, man, this guy really just loves his Nikon camera. But Paul Simon said the song is actually about the distortion of reality, which is really cool if you want to dig deep into that, because it does distort reality. You know how people on Facebook pretend like their lives are just amazing, and then it's like, boom, divorce, or, somebody had a baby with somebody, not his wife. Yeah, it does distort reality. But at the same token, man, it captures some moments you can't get back, right? Okay. Closings are done for the state. I thought that there were some really strong points in there. And I tell you right now, guys, I'm kind of half and half. I'm leaning a little more towards this jury finding him guilty tonight, to be honest, after just really thinking about the totality of the last several weeks. I won't be surprised if it's hung. I won't be surprised if it's guilty. That's really where I'm at. I still want to listen to the state and give everybody their chance. But that's kind of how I'm rolling right now. I won't be surprised. But I do kind of think maybe that guilty scale tipped a little bit today. I saw some reaction. So tomorrow, defense closings. We'll have the prosecution's reply statement. By the way, Jim Griffin said closings for them should be about 2 hours. And then we'll have the jury charges and then deliberations. And literally any time after they go in that room, we could have a verdict. I think maybe I'll be back here Monday. And if I am, that's cool, because I get to hang out with some really awesome people just a little more before we all have to say goodbye. It's been kind of like a true crime summer camp. We all have learned a lot, I think. So we are going to dive into these closings today. I think Creighton Waters has been very passionate about this case, and his passion for justice has shown. And I think that there's been some times where it's been tough for the prosecution, but they've had their great moments too. But let's dive in. The jury, by the way, went on that jury view at 9:10 this morning. They stayed I think about 30 minutes and then went over to the shooting range, which was interesting. So I'm going to throw a few photos up here of that jury view and let you see it. So if you're new to the podcast, if I ever show a photo on here, I will put a link in the description so that you people who just listen can see what we see as well. If you're on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. Like this video and hit the little bell. It'll notify you. I do some shorts every now and then down here. And also in the future, in the other cases I cover, I might hop on and do a short if it's not long enough for an episode or something breaking. So this is the outside of Moselle. It looks very much, I guess, like it did when times were better for the Murdaughs before all this happened. And then the kennel area, and I do not have a photo of this, and I really want to find it, but inside Bubba's little pen was a toy chicken, y'all, or rooster, one of those. And it's just look, I'm an animal lover, and it's not lost on me what Bubba and Grady saw that night. And dogs have feelings, and I just want to pet them. All right, so it was a full house today. Every time a member of the prosecution came in, what did the jury, Lord, what did the crowd do? They clapped as if they're rock stars coming in, or like your favorite football team going in the locker room. They got a warm welcome this morning. So officially, what the state is saying is the time of the murder is between 8:49 and 8:53 p.m. on June the 7th there at Moselle. And let's do this, y'all. We're going to dive in. He starts out, it's been a long trial. You ain't kidding, Mr. Waters. When they said 3 weeks, I literally laughed out loud and said, we'll see maybe deliberations in 6. And I nailed it, because we're at 6 weeks, I think, maybe even 7. I don't know. He says Maggie and Paul were murdered at the kennels by Alec Murdaugh. It was an exhaustive investigation. There was one person with motive, means, and the opportunity to commit these crimes. Who is it? Alec Murdaugh. He was living a lie, and there was a storm descending. He said to set the stage, to understand who he was prominent and respected in his community. He avoided consequence his whole life. He made some bad land deals that led to financial problems. And he names off a few of the financial victims. They're all equally tragic and just amazing how many people, vulnerable people at that he took advantage of. Names Tony Satterfield, who has my utmost respect. That young man is a strong man, strong man. He talks about the millions that Alec earned, but guess what? It wasn't enough. So what does he do? He stole. He stole from everybody, vulnerable people, his firm, his family. Nobody was spared. So they talk about the trust, how he would get the check from the client that was put into that fake forge and moved around, and said he was able to do that because he was a fast talker with not only his staff, but his clients. And get this, we've heard this in the trial, but the clients were happy because they were getting money, but not knowing that he was getting more and keeping that for himself. Except for Tony Satterfield, bless his heart, who did not see a penny until somebody on the news, somebody in the family saw it on the news and said, whoa, there's been a settlement. But of course, Alec thought it was okay. 2015, that's when he gets that fake forge from Bank of America to get those disbursements to use himself. Remember, Jeannie Seckinger, what did she teach us? It doesn't go to the attorney, it goes to the firm. If it doesn't go to the firm, it's stealing. Jeannie Seckinger didn't mince words when she was on that stand. And it's affected her in a lot of ways because she, I believe, is kin to the Laffittes or was through marriage. And so it's hit her on every level. And she's seen the fallout from the Lafitte side because I do believe Russell Laffitte has kids. And unfortunately, this is going to take him away from them for a very long time. All right. So they talk about the fact that Alec was stealing and borrowing at the same time. And Creighton Waters said all of this was a slow burn until that boat crash, which changed everything. I like to say that was the little small snowball at the top of the hill that eventually became just an avalanche for Alec Murdaugh. It really, really did set off a chain of events. We might not be here had it not been for the boat crash, but in some way, Mallory Beach's death is bringing justice to so many people, so many financial victims potentially, to Maggie and Paul. We have to wait for deliberations. But there it's, I don't want to say it's a good thing, but sometimes there's a tiny silver lining in tragedy. And I think the fact that Tony Satterfield now and his brother, for example, among the many other financial victims, will be taken care of for the rest of their life because this may not have ever been discovered. So you have to look at things like that sometimes. But the boat crash brought on the criminal case against Paul, also the civil charges. And what happens? His stealing increased. 4.5 million, by the way, from the Satterfield sons. So it was all coming to a head in the spring of 2021 with all the publicity around that boat case. The saving grace for Alec, the Ferris case. We've heard a lot about the Ferris case. $792,000 paid directly to Alec, and it lasted all of 2 months, and he ran out. So Mark Tinsley, who is the attorney for the Beach family, representing them in the civil suit, he obviously was trying to get a large recovery under the assumption that by first look, Alec Murdaugh would be loaded and would have the money to pay the Beach family a very large settlement. But Alec's lawyer says, yeah, sorry, my client's broke. Well, what did Mark Tinsley do? He says, well, let's go to court. Show me your financials. So that was a big deal, I think, for Alec. I think he knew the walls were tumbling down. So we know on June 7th, Alec's in the office working on the financials for that motion to compel that was filed by Mark Tinsley, the Beach lawyer, that was going to be heard 3 days after the murders. That day he's working in the office. This is the day Jeannie Seckinger confronts him. He told her that his dad is terminal. Now, we know that John Marvin testified that first day they thought it was pneumonia and treatable. So I think Mr. Waters is pointing out here to this jury that he even lied about his dad's condition to get the talk to stop. And it did stop, we know. So talk about he had pressure. It was mounting, and he killed Maggie and Paul because the timeline puts him there. The use of family weapons, it pretty much confirms that. So in the wake of this, everything changes. Things are coming to a head, and as we know what happens when Alec has something pressure pointing him and just coming down on him, he tries to get sympathy, right? So Jeannie Seckinger stops talking about the money. The boat case goes away after the murders. People stop asking him about fees. Everybody rallies around him. We see how many people came to Moselle that night. So then another month, we know his paralegal, Miss Hightower, finds that Ferris case check. So on September 3rd, Alec was forced to resign. And then Chris Wilson, as we know, meets Alec at his mom's house on September the 4th, the next day, and confronts him about the money. And within 2 hours, what do we have? The roadside shooting. Enter cousin Eddie. And again, he's a victim when trouble is about to come. Now, these are all Creighton Waters arguments or things he said. I'm not doing it verbatim, but I do want to try to hit on some of the more important parts. So moving on. I think one thing is this jury is not going to relate to him in a million ways. Financially, they're not. This is an average jury like you and me. We're not rolling in it. I don't have generational wealth and that kind of thing. I've never had any position of power, and maybe some of the jurors have, but I would say most haven't. So he said, you determine what witnesses you rely on. You can agree with all of their testimony or part of their testimony. Is it believable? Talks about the demeanor of the witnesses on the stand. You can believe portions of testimony or not. Just because they're an expert doesn't mean that you have to trust their testimony. Circumstantial, which this case is nothing but circumstantial, and he explains that it is proof of a chain of facts. Laws make a distinction between weight and value of make no distinction between the weight and value of direct evidence. For example, and this is a good example to give the jury, I think. He gives the example of rain. You go inside, you pull the blinds, you draw the curtains, and when you went in, it was dry. When you go out, everything's wet. There's sticks and limbs all in your yard, leaves everywhere. So you can think either somebody shook your tree and made all that fall and like wet with their hose pipe the whole neighborhood, or it rained. So what he means is you didn't have to see it rain to know it rained, but it's circumstantial and it's logical that it rained. And I think that's a really good thing to remind that jury of. So then he said, let's talk about the murders. He talks about malice. It's hatred, hostility, ill will, inflicting injury. And it can be a decision made in the moment. It doesn't have to be planned for 3 months. It can be a 3-second thing. Malice and drugs, that's voluntary intoxication and not a defense to a crime. He talks about the gathering storm, the family legacy, the prominence in the community, the successful law firm, part-time prosecutor. He knows law, and he also gave closing arguments. He was wealthy. He had to make his bonus last all year. Remember, everybody puts their fees in the pot, then it's split based on the percentage you brought in, and then that's your income really. They got a $125,000 base salary, but the bonus was the bread that they brought home every year. And Alec didn't. He didn't make it last. So what did he do? He had extreme pressure to stay one step ahead of all of his stealing. So they talk about Mark Tinsley and that meeting that they had at that conference on Hilton Head Island, where, according to Mr. Tinsley, Alec walks up and says, "Hey, Bo, what you doing with this lawsuit?" or something like that. And they point out, of course, Alec says Mark Tinsley was lying, not him, because Alec denied that ever happened. Mark Tinsley said, yeah, it happened. Also, he had no umbrella policy. That was dropped after the Satterfield case. So Alec's attorney says to Tinsley, hey, he's broke. Tinsley's trying to get a large sum for the Beach family. So what does Mark Tinsley do? He says, let me just file a motion to compel and get your financials. And the thing is, he's going to lose his career and livelihood. That's the focus. That's the state's motive, is that time was running out. The financials were about to explode. And that's what drove him to murder his wife and son. Alec says, look, I'm broke. So they talk about Tony Satterfield real quick. There was coverage for them, but they never knew until a family member saw it in the news that a settlement had been reached. But this was only after all this with the murders came to light. But you think about it, how could you do that to those boys? Somebody that clearly Paul loved. If you watch the Netflix series, they say that Paul had one picture in his wallet and it was Gloria, and he was shattered when she died, absolutely shattered. And Anthony Cook, who was Mallory Beach's boyfriend, flat out said on that documentary, no way, no way, heard the rumors that Paul had anything to do with Gloria's fall. And he said he was broken by her death. So all this, Alec's running out of options. It's all converging. The storm is near. The storm worked. Pressures on Alec were unbearable. So he reached a crossroads on the day of the murders. What happens after the murders? People stop asking him about money. People are scared and they're worried for their law firm, for Alec, for Buster, for everybody. And also, the backlash from the boat case kind of took a back seat because people felt sorry for him. Tinsley thought the boat case was all but over because he said, if it comes out of vigilante killing, took his wife and son away, there's no way we have a case here. It's just not going to happen. People are not going to award the Beach family money if his wife and son have been murdered. So it's now he has a time to think about things that he did not have on June 7th. So Creighton Waters says he's proven he'll do anything to avoid accountability. Then this is something the jurors will not relate to. He's maxed out $1 million line of credit, another $600,000 line of credit. But guess what? He had that $5 overdraft fee that hit him hard. Come on. Overdraft fees just prey on the poor. Somebody that's overdrafted, the worst thing you can do is I mean, come on. These overdraft fees only hurt people who are struggling to get by, not $5 like Alec Murdaugh. It would be better if they gave poor people $5 overdraft fees instead of 40 because things happen sometimes, y'all. But he's a middle-aged man with pressure that no one had ever seen. He battles opioids. He's paranoid. He's agitated, but it gives him energy. Use your common sense about that. Now, I thought this was one of the smartest things Creighton Waters did today. 1,000 milligrams a day drug habit. He sat on the stand and told him that, remember, when he was on the stand. Does that sound survivable? How many times did he look at you in the eye and lie to you? He's very good at it. That was a great point because it's really easy to be removed from all these lies when they don't pertain to you. But if he can get one juror to say, maybe that one juror that was on the fence, to say, you know what? There's no way. 1,000 milligrams a day, respiratory distress, there would be no Alec Murdaugh. And he looked at me and lied as he's telling that story. That could be a huge thing. And that was a power move by Waters, I think. He said, how many times did he look you in your eyes and lie? No doubt he was taking pills. You decide if he looked at you and lied. He said, if you have any questions, rewatch those interviews. He doesn't look like he's withdrawn from drugs. He's focused on the events at hand. And yet information on the investigation in Savannah, what does he do? He sits with a composite sketch artist. How do you do that? Maggie called Paul Little Detective because he would watch to be sure Alec wasn't taking pills. What's interesting, Alec called him that too. But that was a nickname apparently Maggie gave him. In May, remember, we have those texts about the pills where Paul is being a responsible child looking after his dad. We have to talk. That's typically something I say to my kids when I have a problem with them. But you have Paul almost in the adult role of saying, and Paul was an adult. He was 22 when he was murdered. But you've got your child calling you out and saying, we need to talk. And I'm still at Edisto Beach because we found your pills or mom found your pills. It says, look at the text the weekend of the baseball tournament in Columbia. Alec, not at the game. Don't come if you don't feel bad, text Maggie. Alec was at the hotel. At this point, Creighton Waters said Alec had run out of money and options. That was the lunch break. Back from lunch. The family weapon, the blackout. He shows the check on the screen that Alec wrote to buy those. And I'm going to tell you right now, for a lawyer to write checks to your drug dude, it's the dumbest thing you can do. Really. I mean, geez, he's an attorney. Why is he writing checks? Who writes checks, right? Yeah. All right. So the story was, according to Paul, that blackout that he got that had the thermal scope went missing at a Halloween party in 2017. The replacement was bought the next year in 2018. So 3 blackout rifles. We only have 1 we can account for. They talk about Will Loving, who was Paul's good friend, who was so articulate on the stand and gave us a little schooling on how to identify guns and different features. Very well spoken man. He is a police officer here in Walterboro. But he disputed the fact that Alec said they were looking for that missing gun around Christmas of 2020 because Will was with Paul during turkey season. And he said, "We shot it. We shot it. We shot it at the entrance of the gun room down the range." They said they had put that red dot sight on it and leveled it with the handles, with the rails. And so that discredited it, that story that it was gone since Christmas. And that was just a couple of months before the murders, by the way. Not only that, but the 147 grain blackout found all over the property. Yep, those 6 casings found around Maggie, they were loaded into, extracted, and ejected from the same as the casings found on the property, from the same gun. It's a big deal. 12 gauge shotgun, that was Paul's favorite. They bring both these guns out, by the way, to show the jury, but he explains how shotgun shells are different from rifles. The characteristics are similar, but you can't match or exclude the shotgun as being the murder weapon for Paul. He knows gunshot residue was found in the car, also on Alec. They brought out the forensic timeline, and we're not going to go through all that. We've went through it several times, but we will hit a couple of important timelines here. The biggest one, and I think this is the biggest hurdle the defense has to come up with, and I'm going to tell you, Alec's excuse doesn't hold a lot with me. We know at 8:44 and 55 seconds that kennel video is recorded by little detective who left 1 or 2 final little clues with that Snapchat video and the kennel video. So it wasn't until April of last year that law enforcement gets it. If you remember, the Secret Service had to open Paul's phone, and that's when they found the kennel video. It changed everything. It puts him at the scene of the crime minutes before both Maggie and Paul are murdered. It exposed his lies, and most importantly, he could have told law enforcement that he was at the kennels. Why would an innocent and reasonable dad lie about that? He didn't know the video existed, but they talked to Rogan, who said, "I heard Alec on the phone when I was on the phone with Paul." Because remember, Rogan never got the video. Paul never got a chance to send it. So we know at 8:49, within 30 seconds, both of their phones lock forever. And then after Alec hears people say on the stand time and time again, everybody that knew the man was asked to view the video and identify the voices. I identify Maggie Murdaugh, Paul Murdaugh, Alec Murdaugh. 100% sure. So what does he do? He's forced to take the stand, and he's forced to do what he does all the time, which is come up with a new lie. Why do that if you're innocent? Maggie asked him to go to the kennels, remember? He said, "Well, I usually don't want to go. I don't get sweaty." Look, I'm going to tell you, I agree with Murdaugh on that because it's the South. These people that are from other places learned today what low country humidity is all about. We were all fresh, y'all. We were all a little damp. It was hot. But remember, he said at the very last minute he decided to take the golf cart down to the kennel. But if you're innocent, why would you lie about that? Even with the benefit of the doubt, it doesn't make sense. So he said, I thought this is funny. At 9:02, you're up from the quickest nap ever. And then he said to the jury, "You guys have been to the scene. You saw Dr. Kinsey show where Paul was in the kill zone in the middle of that room. No defensive wounds, buckshot to the chest. The shooter probably assumed he was dead, and that was a 1,000,000 to 1 shot, and it didn't kill him." So 2 guns used. It confuses people. That's exactly maybe why 2 guns were used. If you can't convince them, confuse them, right? That's what my grandpa used to say. But was Alec startled by Paul? So he says he blows his brains out. Then you have the mark on Maggie's leg from that Polaris. You have that footprint pattern of hers, and they were the last ones, and no defensive wounds. And this really was powerful with the women on the jury. I watched their faces as a mother. It was powerful for me. What does Maggie do? She runs to her baby, Paul. The last thing is Alec. did this. He picks up the blackout and takes shots. She's hurt. She falls, 2 shots to the head. The first one's fatal. Fatal. Is that malice? She's running to her baby and she gets mowed down. Alec said we don't see any activity on his phone for a while. Then we talk about the wash off. How did he get clean? He said, well, the hose wasn't put up like the dog keeper who loves his recliner puts the hose up. It's really easy to strip down right there at the kennels and wash any biological material you have off of you. Alec said that, let's see, I'm sorry, y'all, between 902 and 906, 283 steps. Remember, that's what Creighton's like. Were you doing jumping jacks? Were you running in place, talking on the phone? 903, the car kind of wakes up, which means the key fob is near it. And he's making calls like crazy. He can't remember. When he's on the stand, Creighton Waters asks, what were you doing? Can't remember. He's manufacturing an alibi. I have in my notes here that a juror was asleep. Yes, either she was asleep or she was zen, like zen to the zen, y'all. I mean, like she was zenned out for 5 minutes, maybe 10. 9:05 and 56 seconds, that car starts. Why not go check on Maggie? You've been calling her. You've been texting her. You're right there. Why would you not go check on her? That was what Creighton Waters says. He leaves Moselle. The other thing he mentions is that Alec asked Maggie to come home that night. Alec was shaking his head no when that was said, but her sister testified to that. I really do believe it. They go into the backlight issue. I'm not going to regurgitate all that. We just know there's a lot of variables, but ironically enough, Alec is driving by at the same time the backlight is triggered on her phone. On the way to his mom's, we know he calls Chris Wilson, John Marvin, all those different people. At this point, I put the jury was getting a little restless, and Judge Newman, being the great man he is, who I love, I'm proud he is a South Carolina judge, y'all. I think he's very fair and proud to share the state with him. And also, it should be said, I know a lot of you are aware, his son, who was 40 years old maybe, passed away suddenly, unexpectedly. He was an attorney and just seems like a great business, but career man, lawyer, following his dad's footsteps maybe, but he passed away suddenly right before this case went to trial. And what has Judge Newman done? Showed up every day because the wheels of justice, he didn't want him to stop, and I admire him for that. So at 9:52, he calls to manufacture an alibi by calling Chris Wilson. Also, those call logs, we know they were deleted. So at 10:05:57, Alec arrives at the kennels after he's been to his mom's. At 10:06:14, there's the 911 call. He's told people he checked pulses on Maggie and Paul before he called 911. Is 19 seconds enough time to process what you're seeing and call 911? You get out of the car, you check them. Is that enough time? But Creighton Waters says he knew exactly what he was seeing. At 10:11 to 10:14, he goes back to Moselle to get the shotgun. After calling 911, he calls Randy, spends time trying to call Rogan multiple times, which Creighton Waters points out before you're calling Buster and other family members. Alec had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to kill Maggie and Paul. Then we talk about a consciousness of guilt. That's brought up that he asked Blanca to say he was in a Vineyard Vine shirt. And Creighton Waters points out that he changed his shoes multiple times that day. He also said, I hurt the ones I love the most. Again, a consciousness of guilt. Same thing with Shelley as with Blanca. After Randolph's funeral, shows up early in the morning, 6:30 or something, with the blue tarp/rain jacket. He moves trucks. There's a ton of gunshot residue on the inside of this jacket. And he asked Shelley to say, hey, I was here longer. If anybody asks, I was here 30, 40 minutes. What does that do? It bothers Miss Shelley so much that she calls her brother to talk about it. And it says he lied because he had a distrust of Sled when he's asked about his relationship with Maggie. And also he had pills in his pocket. So they play the video from that very first night, that video in the car. The cop says, I have to do this. Alec says, I understand. What does Mr. Waters do? Pauses it. Is this when he decided to lie? I was at the house. Pause. Was this the point? I took a nap, 25 to 30 minutes. Called Maggie, no answer. Left to go to mom's. Creighton Waters stops and said he lied about such a crucial thing, about not being at the kennels. I do agree. That could be what sinks his boat. He calls Maggie, no answer, no big deal. 283 steps, calls people, don't drive to the kennels. Plays the interview in that second police car the next day. He immediately is talking about the boat wreck and said, actually, there was a motion on the 10th that I was supposed to go to. At this point, I have in my notes the family got really uncomfortable, and there have been select times this family has looked uncomfortable. One of those being when they talked about cousin Eddie. And when they talk about the lies, it is crazy. So the last time you saw Pa and Maggie in this interview was eating supper. This is what he says. Yes, sir. Third interview, August 11th. This is the kennel stuff. He said he stayed on the couch and dozed off. But then they talk about, well, we have a video on Paul's phone. So you weren't wearing the same clothes as when I got there as what you were wearing in the Snapchat video. And Alex says, I don't know. Was it before or after dinner? Now, here's something very smart that he does. And maybe a cop catches it, but us lay people don't always. But he asks, what time was that video filmed? Oh, between 7:30 and 8. Of course, Alex says, I guess I did that when I got back to the house. Then they ask him, you didn't go back to the kennels after dinner? Nope. So the cell phone is pulled out. You hear Maggie in the background, you and your son. And also, Rogan says he recognizes your voice at 9 o'clock. Or no, I'm sorry. Rogan asked me at 9 o'clock. Wait, y'all, it's almost midnight. Let me start this one over. He asked, who do you think that voice was that has been identified? No idea. I don't know. It's not me. Bubba, it was you, dude. Come on, man. And the cop recognizes that, he's lying. So 3:45, they covered the monitors. They go over the wounds to Maggie and Paul. Remember, his face was intact. It was not a contact wound. Dr. Kinsey said buckshot does not reverse course. He said had the shooter come in like the defense expert said and got behind him and shot him in the back of the head, most of those pellets would have been in the yard and not inside that feed room. Also, Dr. Kinsey and Dr. Reamer, they're consistent in their findings. You go over Dr. Kinsey's testimony. He tries to say height has to be 5'2". Dr. Kinsey says the defense expert, their claims that it is a 5'2" shooter and that the little line they have to stay on, it's a red herring is what they're saying. Height and 2 shooters is a red herring. Maggie had no defensive wounds. She had stippling. She also had the imprint of that Polaris tire on her leg, and she run to her baby. She was on her hands and knees at the end, got the first fatal shot to the head, and the defense experts say the shooters were 5'2". Dr. Kinsey showed how somebody 6'4" or 7'4" could have been the shooter. And then the defense talks about the little gray people the defense put up on their visual. And then he goes back. Maggie collapses as Alec is moving around her, firing the gun. There's gunshot residue on his hand and also on that seatbelt. So we had a break here, and they point out, Alec didn't say, if I only had been there, if only I had gone to the kennels, I could have stopped it. I could have been there a little longer, but they say Alec got out of there. He points out Alec's testimony contradicted Mark Tinsley's, Blanca Simpson, and Shelley Smith. 3 people who really have no incentive to lie on the stand. Lies are going to be his undoing. That's why I like to wait until closings to hear it at the end of everything, because I think pointing out the lies, how can you trust what he says about that night? And I do think now that pushes me more towards thinking the jury will maybe find him guilty. To believe Alec is to believe a 5'2" vigilante came at just the right time. Remember, Paul and Maggie were never home, really. Maggie was in Edisto. Paul was everywhere, it seems. He said Alec's lies were coming out and his ego could not allow that. He became the family annihilator. He said, by the way, we couldn't bring you any eyewitnesses because they've been murdered. He said, but common sense and human nature can speak on behalf of Maggie and Paul. Look at this case in its totality. They deserve a voice. He points out Alec deleted phone calls, changed clothes, ditched Maggie's phone. He lied to you, just like he lied to everyone in his life, and he was good at it. They show the interview again and say that Maggie and Paul deserve a voice. And the system depends on people who take an oath as jurors to make tough decisions and honor that oath. He asked the jury to vindicate Maggie and Paul, who were cut down in the prime of their lives. And he shows a picture which was covered. This is what he did. This is what he did right here. This defendant has fooled everyone in his life. He fooled Maggie and Paul, and they paid for it with their lives. Don't let him fool you too. And that was it. I thought it was what it needed to be. Now let's see what the defense says tomorrow. I do think that there are some on the jury that like Harpootlian. He cracks people up. I know by default people don't like defense attorneys, but I'm going to tell you right now, he has a gift of, I said last night on News Nation, he's kind of like one of those Sour Patch Kids. He's really sour, but he's really sweet, and he's very charming. And the other thing too, another thing people ask me, what do I think about Alec's interactions with people? Again, he's very charming. And I know what he's been accused of, but I do see how he was able to get by with so many things because he's very charming in court, to the court staff, to his attorneys. Yeah, so you see how that can be used to his benefit, which he did for a very long time. All right, guys, that's it. I'm going to stop here. I'll bring it back to you tomorrow. And who knows, maybe Friday will be my last time down here. Although I've had an amazing experience. I'm super grateful to Law and Crime. And I'm just so happy I've met so many cool people that I think will definitely be friends way after we get a verdict. And if you can get a little bit of beauty in such nastiness, then, it's not all lost. All right. Okay, guys, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.